to the stage right now is our first fireside chat of the day. It's going to be an incredible conversation between two incredible brands. On the one hand, we have Canopy Growth, and on the other hand, we have Wana Brands. Two incredible organizations, one incredible conversation led by the one and only Yeji Jesse Lee, a reporter from The Insider. Let's make some noise as we welcome Yeji to the stage.
All right, good morning, everybody. I want to introduce to the stage Nancy Whiteman of Wana Brands and David Klein, Canopy Growth. How's everyone doing? Okay, all right. Well, today we will be talking about the future of cannabis, but before we get to that, I think it might be helpful to get just a little bit of background about what you guys are doing before you sort of jumped into the cannabis space. So, David, why don't you lead us off, and then we'll move on to Nancy after.
Yeah, so my cannabis business journey really started in 2017 when I was the CFO for Constellation Brands. We brought in a group that's called the Faith Popcorn Brain Reserve, who are futurists, and they were talking about macro trends that might affect the alcohol industry. And the most fascinating part of their discussion was this concept where people were trying to optimize their emotional and mental well-being by using things like cannabis. And to me, it just seemed like it was the right thing at the right time, as we know, people had been optimizing their bodies for 50 years by the food that they eat and exercising and so forth. So at that point in time, I personally re-engaged with cannabis and found that this amazing plant could do incredible things to help people and make lives better. And so I thought, wow, I really want to participate in this. And so maybe it was a pretty crazy thing to do, but I quit my job as the CFO of a Fortune 500 company to step into the cannabis space. And here we are.
And here we are. All right, Nancy, go ahead.
Well, I often say about myself that I need a better backstory for how I got into cannabis, because so many people got into it for really noble reasons. A personal situation, a loved one, activism, etc. But mine is a lot more mundane than that. My background is a sort of a traditional background. I have an MBA. I worked in corporate America for years. And I think, actually, with the exception of my friends from high school, few people would have probably predicted that I was going to go into cannabis. On the other hand, my friends from high school were not at all surprised, I should say. But the truth is, I actually didn't know much about the medical uses of cannabis. It really wasn't that I didn't believe it, I just didn't know what it was. And so one of my kids' friends was over, and her dad came over to pick her up. And I said to him, he was in commercial real estate, which was not a great place to be in Colorado in 2010. I said, "What are you doing these days?" And he said, "Oh, you wouldn't approve." And I said, "Oh, try me." And he said, "I'm starting an infused soda pop company." And I said, "What's it infused with?" I really didn't even know what he was talking about. And long story short, we ended up building out a kitchen with him and got into the business in a very grassrootsy kind of way. I literally tested products in my home kitchen without THC, I must add, because I had children at home. But kind of got into it really not understanding the power of what we were doing. And then we started to get this incredible feedback from our customers about how much our products were helping them. And it was like the proverbial light bulb going off. And then I became just fascinated and almost obsessed with the power of the plant and what it could really do to improve people's lives. Our motto is enhance your life. And it kind of all took off from there.
All right, well, thank you guys. Now, you guys operate two very different companies. David, you operate a Canadian giant LP. Nancy, a Colorado-based edibles company that's grown just a lot over, the past decade?
12 years.
12 years. Now, could you sort of explain to the audience what your operations in the U.S. are like and how you compete with U.S. MSOs or other companies in this space?
So I guess the first point that I'd like to make is that we are a U.S. company. So we're a Canadian we're Canadian LP, but if you sit through a few of the presentations today, you're going to see components of Canopy growth because we have, and you've all spent a lot of time, I'm sure, working your way around the legal and corporate structures required to play in the cannabis space, but we have fully paid up right to buy Wana upon permissibility in the U.S., what we call a triggering event. We have the same rights with Acreage, and we have an ownership stake in TerraSend. And so we already have a presence in the U.S. that continues to grow and kind of build on itself, hopefully working with the various components of Canopy's business in the U.S. So we think that we have the ability to create a thriving cannabis enterprise in the U.S. Even before permissibility.
Yeah, in terms of Wana's operational footprint, we currently operate in 14 states in the U.S., 9 markets in Canada, and we just launched in Puerto Rico 2 weeks ago, so our first foray into Latin America. We're very excited about that. And we have 3 more markets that are going to be launching in the next couple of months, and we're in discussions with about 6 other markets. So we have a huge amount of growth ahead of us in terms of growing our geographic footprint. The other thing that I would say that's relevant about Wana's operations is really our focus on product innovation and how we have structured the company to really support that. In the last 2 years, we have introduced our Wana Quick line, which is our quick onset products, by far the best-selling fast onset edible in the country. We introduced our Optimals line, which is our use case specific line that's more focused on health and wellness applications. And then in the last month, we just launched our live rosin line. So we're very, very focused on cannabis, not just as a recreational opportunity, but as a mood management and health and wellness opportunity. Oh, so I'm sorry, you asked another question, Jesse, about competing with MSOs. And, you know, it's an interesting thing for someone who's sort of a pure play brand because the MSOs obviously have their own brands. But I think that on the retail relationship side, I think that most of the MSOs really do understand that their customers want choice and they want access to the best products. So I would say that we have a very good working relationship with most of the MSOs at this point.
You know, I'd like to add to that too. I actually think as an industry, we need to do a better job of collaborating. I think, you know, we're really, as an industry, people ask, you know, what inning are you in? And I hear people say we're in the, 3rd inning. I think like the first pitch has kind of just been thrown out, right?
I completely agree.
We're just getting started, and you know, to me, the concept of competition I think is super important. But I'd rather see more collaboration because we can make this industry a lot bigger than it is today. I think we have the opportunity to have an industry that's the same size as the beer industry in the U.S. And just think about the number of beer brands out there and beer retailers and beer on-premise organizations. I just think there's a lot more we can do if we focus on collaboration as opposed to just out-competing each other. We'll ultimately compete, but let's compete at the consumer level and let's not try to gouge each other's eyes out while we're getting
I used to refer to that, David, as co-opetition. Yeah, so we need more of that for sure.
Speaking of being in the first inning and also the potential for collaboration, you know, obviously pretty much all of the regulations that have happened around cannabis in the US have been on a state-by-state level, but obviously federal legalization or some sort of federal permissibility is super important to Canopy especially. So how do you guys see that rolling out if and when that does happen?
So I think with the US platform that we have, inclusive of Wana and Acreage and some of our other investments in the US, those businesses continue to grow and innovate and compete in this marketplace prior to permissibility. So we don't necessarily need it to happen for our success. What happens for us is our story gets easier to tell. Because right now, Nancy has a beautiful business with a great top line that's profitable. We have, you'll hear from Peter Caldini from Acreage. They have a really nice looking business that's really well positioned in some of the big markets in the US that are just beginning to open up right now. But if you open up our financial statement, you don't see any of those businesses in there, even though in some instances we've actually paid for those businesses. We've sent the cash off of our balance sheet, but you don't see that coming through our P&L yet. Upon federal permissibility, we can then consolidate everything, and so our business gets easier to explain to people. But in the meantime, the businesses can continue to function and grow and do all the great things we want them to do. And then in terms of the state regulation environment, as somebody that comes from alcohol, I'm used to that. Every single state has a different set of rules, and so you just have to figure out how to adapt, and I'm sure we can do that. It would just be a hell of a lot easier if we could use the banks and all the other things that come with federal legalization.
Yeah, to kind of build on what David's saying, I think that Wana has built its market expansion strategy on an asset-light model, which means that we are partnering with people who are license holders in various markets, except Colorado, where we're the license holder. That's our home state. That really does give us the flexibility to be very successful both pre-permissibility and post-permissibility. In terms of how I see the state-by-state thing changing under federal legalization, I'm going to say the obvious things. Obviously, certain elements of it get a lot easier. We can ship across state lines. We can source our biomass more effectively. What I don't expect to see happen, though, is I don't think that we're going to see one uniform set of rules in place across the country. I think states are going to retain broad discretion over their programs. And what that means for me as a brand is that I don't see a scenario where we're going to be able to produce one unified set of products, one portfolio that we can then ship everywhere. So that in many ways makes our model even more attractive, because I don't think that there's probably one facility that's going to be able to create all the different versions of SKUs that we're going to need even post federal permissibility.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I sort of want to dig into what that sort of landscape would look like a little bit further. I think a lot of people hate it when I ask this question, and they always say, like, nobody has a crystal ball, etc., all of those caveats in mind. Like, how would you imagine that sort of change coming about, whether you want to name a specific bill, whether you want to name a specific politician who's sort of leading the charge on that? Like, what do you think has the best chance of success here?
David, can you give a specific date?
Yeah, David, come on.
Yeah, well, so I think for all of us that are in the cannabis industry, I think the thing that we have to do really well is to be agile, and to, Nancy was just talking about often having to play whack-a-mole to solve all the various problems that come up during the course of a day. And so, I think we're likely to see a lot of progress around legalization outside of the easy answer, which would be a bill gets passed and it gets signed into law. I think we're going to see just a lot of piecemeal activity, and so we all need to stay real agile to take advantage, of that. And it's interesting that if you look at the number of bills that have been proposed, they all look kind of the same, with a couple of differences. If you look at the differences between the Booker, Whiteman, and Schumer bill versus Nancy Mace's bill, there are like 4 things that are different between those. If people really wanted to get together and negotiate that, you could probably knock that off in an afternoon. It's almost politically more popular to talk about cannabis reform than it is to do cannabis reform. And so I think that's just going to get dragged out until there's an obvious way for both parties to win for voting in favor of it.
Yeah.
So that was a big, long filibuster that says nothing about dates.
Yeah, no, I expected as much. Nancy, anything to add here?
Actually, I think David covered it pretty well. I don't think I have anything to add to that one.
Okay, perfect. Well, moving on. Obviously, like you said, David, it seems like we're sort of in the first inning of this big entire industry. What are the biggest trends or patterns that you see moving forward into the next year or in the years forward? What can we expect to see, and what do you guys expect to do over the course of the next decade or so? Nancy, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. well, I'm going to, again, say some of the things that I'm sure are obvious to everybody, but I think we're going to see a lot of industry consolidation. And part of that is due to some of the capital constraints that we're seeing right now in the industry. And part of it is just due to sort of the natural flow of new industries. Lots of entrants come into the market. People figure out that they can't really make it on their own. They start looking for strong partners. So I think we're going to see that trend accelerate. What I'm really hoping, particularly with some of the research bills that are out there, is that we are going to, even pre-legalization, start to see a real blossoming of true research on the plant, which in turn will enable us to do much more sophisticated formulation and will really be able to allow us to dial into combining cannabinoids, combining terpenes for things that are very specific and targeted and will really allow us to create more effective products for people. I think we're also starting to see a little bit of a shift in distribution. Excuse me. Right now, it's 98% driven by dispensaries. And we're now starting to see some emerging direct-to-consumer models, particularly in California. So I think that's some of the things that we could see even pre-legalization. Of course, post-legalization, distribution is a wide-open discussion.
All right, David.
Yeah, and I would say the thing I'm most excited about is the consumer journey. There are a lot of consumers that have been part of the cannabis industry, been consuming cannabis products for a long time, right? And if you think about our industry, and again, using alcohol just as a simple analog here, it's almost as if the beer industry were to start today, would it look like craft beer? And then you would end up with maybe a broader market, more mainstream market that develops over time. And if you think about a craft beer consumer versus the current cannabis consumer, there are different sets of preferences, different things they're looking for. And so for me, I think as our industry evolves, I think we'll see a lot of experimentation in product type. We'll see a lot of experimentation in retail access for consumers so that the soccer moms feel comfortable going into dispensaries instead of feeling like it's a strange experience for them. And we're getting there in some markets. Like I love some of the retail shops in California that feel like you're walking into, almost like a high-end cosmetic shop or something, the way the floors are laid out. I think as we get more of that, we're going to see a fascinating connection with consumers that'll lead us in, I think, directions that we couldn't even predict today.
All right. I think we have around 2 minutes left. So Nancy, I sort of want to dig into one of the predictions that you mentioned earlier. You talked about how we should expect to see a lot more consolidation in the industry, which we've already seen, and it definitely makes sense moving forward. Where do you see a lot of that consolidation coming from? Which players?
Which sectors? Yeah,
which sectors and which sorts of players should we expect to be sort of going into that?
I think you're going to see it literally in every sector. I think that one of the things that makes it difficult to compete in cannabis is scale. And one of the biggest challenges of the state-by-state model is it's extremely hard to get scale because you essentially have to start over in every market that you go into. So I see it in brands, and particularly small independent brands are scrambling. We're also in a time of price compression, and that really favors people who have raised capital and can afford to play the top-line game without immediate concerns about profitability, but most people are not in that position, most new brands. And I think that we see the same thing in retail and cultivation, so I see consolidation happening all over.
All right. And David, something you said, you mentioned, we can expect to see new form factors, different kinds of products. It seems like, there's a lot of experimentation going on, but it feels like to me that flower is still king. Do you see that changing at all? And if so, when can we expect
No,
that?
look, our team spent a lot of time thinking about this, and flower is king. Flower will be king for the foreseeable future. Over time, as new entrants come into the category, I think you might see them coming in through edibles and drinks and other form factors. But I think that flowers where it's at, and it's going to stay that way for, you know, at least the next 10 years. And, you know, interestingly, I always thought as new people would come into the category, and maybe they would come in through edibles, they would stick with edibles, and maybe they wouldn't go to inhalables. And I'm hearing, at least anecdotally, more and more stories of people starting out in edibles or drinks, and then ultimately that leads them to starting to experience inhalables, which you know, just tells me that there's a long runway for flower, and of course, it is the focal point of our industry.
All right, guys, I think we are just out of time, but David, Nancy, thank you guys so much. I feel like this has been really interesting, and I hope you guys enjoyed.
Thank you so much.